that, I will turn it over to Michelle.
Great. Thanks so much, Casey. And hello to everybody who's on this call from across the United States. We're so happy to have you here today. And what a great topic to talk about. I feel like most of the time when I'm talking about compliance, I am lecturing in a way that makes it sound like it's very difficult to do compliance, even though we try not to make it difficult, and that there's no other reason to do it except to keep the regulators happy and to keep class action attorneys away. And as the panel today will discuss, there's lots of great reasons to do that, including the fact that compliance sells. And if you ask Google if compliance sells, you'll be happy to know that the answer is yes. And the response is that compliance officers make about $70,000 a year. So compliance officers are definitely selling compliance. And you know, when we gathered this panel together, we really wanted to get a perspective from not just the vendors, but also the sellers and those that are providing services to all of those groups. And so with that, let's go ahead and bring our panel in, and we'll ask them to introduce themselves. I love it when technology works, and then all of a sudden, all of you guys are there. Beautiful thing, beautiful thing. You guys can all unmute yourselves now, and I'm going to go in the order that I see you on the screen. And so that means, Joe, if you'd like to introduce yourself first.
Sure. Joe Meehan with And Agency. I'm a VP of Business Development. And Agency does customer experience and employee experience solutions, and that includes workplace for employee satisfaction.
Matt?
Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Matt McGeorge with the Meridal Infusion BPO Services. I'm the EVP here. I oversee our North America operations as well as business development. So I have a large part in our compliance role here, and looking forward to today's discussion.
Sandra?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Sandra Fernandez. I am the Vice President of Compliance and Risk Management with responsibilities globally for all of our 29 sites. And I look forward to having a discussion with everybody today.
Viviana?
Good morning. Thanks for having me. My name is Viviana Harrington. I'm one of the lawyers for Aptiv Environmental, which is a pest control company based in Utah. Before I do compliance and corporate counseling. I'm licensed in Missouri only, though. Before Aptiv, I was in Houston with a solar company and also overseeing their compliance program. And before that, I was back in Utah with Vivian Inc. So yeah, providing and enjoying the compliance efforts that the companies are putting together from mid-level to seeing them grow into public companies. And again, happy to be here.
All right, Julie?
Hi, I'm Julie Castillo. I'm the Chief Strategic Officer and CMO of IBEX, and IBEX is a BPO company, and we have locations in the U.S., offshore, nearshore. So I'm excited to talk about compliance in the role today because it really is a big part of who we are, especially in our healthcare and our financial services vertical. So looking forward to talking today.
Yeah, and it's probably a good idea to go ahead and level set as we get started with the program. You know, what are we talking about when we're talking about compliance and compliance programs? And, you know, generally, I think that the best compliance programs share these elements. They have compliance guidelines, that is, they have policies and procedures. They train their employees, their vendors, so the relevant folks on those compliance policies and procedures. They have monitoring and enforcement to make sure that those policies and procedures are being followed. And if they're not, then there are consequences to that. There's a critical path analysis usually, and that means you're looking at all steps of the process to see where you're most vulnerable for compliance gaps. And you're really focusing on those types of things and having extra testing and monitoring there. There's record keeping. Compliance is no good unless you're proving that you're compliant, and that is going to require record keeping. Having good legal counsel like Viviana, and it's important to also have a compliance committee or a compliance officer that is responsible for compliance. So when we're talking about compliance, those are the types of things that we're talking about. So Viviana, let's start with you. As a purchaser of services and working with companies that are marketing and advertising and performing other services where they could have sensitive customer information, what's been your experience with onboarding vendors, and how is compliance folded into that?
I think I have seen it all. My experience has been actually from both the purchasing and the seller side. But one of the biggest concerns companies have when going the outsource route, of course, there's many benefits, but from the compliance standpoint, is how do we maintain that necessary level of control that will satisfy your compliance culture and will make sure that it's efforts and not going to ruin your brand or in 1 second affect your customers or anything that you care about. So the first and the key component is making sure that there's a compliance program. And if there's legal counsel associated to that compliance program, then it's going to be more beneficial if it's in-house because they understand the culture of the company as well. And that goes from having a compliance review from the beginning of the relationship. So when you're onboarding, including in your compliance program, those items that are necessary and that are inconsistent with, or that need to be inconsistent with your companies. So that includes reviewing materials, making sure you're having conversations about, again, before the relationship is established, making sure that your attorneys are involved. And if you don't have attorneys, you have someone who's leveraging that relationship and working with outside counsel like Michelle's company or any law firm that cares about compliance. That way, again, everything is consistent. Looks like you're mute.
On the other side of that, once you onboard somebody and God forbid there's some type of compliance issue that arises with that vendor, how are those issues dealt with? And will that always terminate the relationship, or are there ways to handle that it would maybe strengthen the relationship?
It usually depends on the issue, right? But generally, if it's not a very serious issue, you should be able to work through those issues with the legal counsel again, or with the compliance person in those companies. But again, that's actually one important thing that you will know. If you're doing a good compliance review before engaging with that company, you will get a sense of whether that company is willing to work with you or not throughout the relationship. If you ask for documentation, so not all the review that you will do on branding and reputational efforts and everything that a compliance program includes is going to be available online. Sometimes you have to go in and request documents. So, for example, I like to request sample of complaints and how they are responded to. That gives me an idea of how often and how much the customer is engaged with issues, but also how the company responds to that and how soon, because timing sometimes is important. And if I don't get that documentation soon, that's already a red flag. There's either a lot of complaints or they really have none, and there's something weird about it. So again, that initial communication is going to be key to know whether you're going to be able to work through those issues in the future or not.
Sure. Absolutely. And then, so hearing that, Julie, that brings us to, so if you're a vendor and you're looking to, to sales and how you can sell compliance as you're trying to establish new relationships as a marketing officer, how do you do that? And, what kind of materials are you using?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, like Viviana said, it's really important to make sure that we're protecting our clients and their brand and their customers, right? So we have as part of our positioning in the market, specifically for verticals like financial services and healthcare, where, protecting that information is job number one. So we have a global affairs unit that is a very integral part of our sales process. And that really is a pillar of our company. So we're InfoSec and compliance, come together, we really have a lot of emphasis on that global affairs unit. And then we drill down on a lot of areas from there, right? We drill down on the physical administration and technical controls, along with all the regulatory environment focus. We manage and monitor over 200 different regulatory affairs organizations on behalf of the different verticals that we serve. So knowing those, knowing what all of, putting that kind of an emphasis on that, making sure that our clients understand that we have that type of rigor around compliance, that it's not just something on our website. It's really a pillar of who we are. And it's a holistic structure from strategic to really tactical. I think that's the really important part of making sure that our clients understand that. And it flows through training, where we have anti-bribery and fraud prevention training. It flows through technical tools that we provide for our agents, hiring, recruiting, all the fingerprinting and sanctions that we need if that's required by the client. So that is a very big part of the positioning of who we are as a company and as a compliance thought leader.
Yeah, and Sandra, kind of following up on that, there is a sales cycle for all companies, and compliance absolutely falls into that sales cycle. How do you see that folding in with your duties and with your company?
Yes, Michelle. So it actually starts from the very beginning. From compliance is a really strategic partner in the entire cycle. And it starts from marketing all the way through RFPs and sales through implementation. And one of the bigger areas to focus on, as well as understanding the regulatory environments that our clients are working in, so that we have a better understanding of what we need to apply and customize those regulations or those controls to their particular business. So having a strong compliance team is not only beneficial. Having knowledge of all the compliance controls that are needed is not only beneficial. Really, someone that starts from the beginning. Everyone, we're all in this together. We all have a huge level of responsibility. We certainly care about the work that we're doing. We certainly want to make sure from a reputational damage is not there, or that any customer account is impacted. So it starts really having those discussions from the very beginning. We have also classes that we lead with our executive leadership teams to show them or provide them with additional awareness around what new regulations are coming into play, and that how that folds into the clientele that we're working with as well.
Yeah. And Matt, that kind of leads into some questions about, maybe some war stories, or, what prompts that type of culture of compliance within companies like yours. And, there's the very large companies out there that have a lot of staff to help with these types of compliance processes. And then there's some of us that are a little smaller that might have to, use the resources they have available. And so share some of your stories with us.
Sure. Thank you, Michelle. So our compliance journey really started kind of by chance. So a little over 25 years ago, we had an opportunity to partner with a healthcare organization that was just getting started, looking to scale. We admittedly went to them and said, we really don't know what we're doing. We need your help. And they were gracious enough to offer their help, and they really guided us into compliance. We knew about compliance, but we didn't know to the degree we know now. We had no idea what it would entail and what the cost and investment would be over the course of time, because it's obviously not a one-time event that you spend X dollars and you're good. It's ongoing, ever evolving. So we were fortunate to have a great partner really teach us what we needed to learn, and really springboarded our business and growth into other sectors that require that compliance. And it's really, as probably Sandra and Julia have recognized, it's really a prerequisite to have a business development type conversation with a lot of organizations. So, we've been again, grateful to our partners that have helped us. And then we've really built out a team, just as Julie and Sandra outlined, of compliance. There's a group that handles InfoSec to premise-based security to digital security and so on and so forth. So there's obviously a lot to learn, more than just one person by themselves can do. And it takes a team. And as I mentioned, it's ongoing. So it's an everyday effort from the top down and the bottom up from the entire organization.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I think the best models I've seen out there is where there's strong collaboration between a company and its vendors, and that culture of compliance permeates throughout both of those organizations in a collaborative way. Because unless you've got that type of collaboration, I think it's very easy to have holes in compliance programs. So that's a great point that you make. And Joe, I know that you are involved in a lot of corporate surveys and those types of things, and so that involves a lot of direct-to-consumer, a lot of communication, and then also gathering information that probably has a lot of privacy types of implications. So I'm sure you were approached with these types of questions every day. Is it something that you are responding to, in a proactive type of way? How do you handle those types of questions?
Well, because I deal with it from a business development side, we're looking through contracts, and we deal with a variety of industries, from education, financial services, and healthcare. So as many of you already had mentioned, the compliance is so wide on all those different industries. But what we try to do is understand what our clients are asking of us and where we fit into their compliance process, and then try to educate them too on the things that we do, but also within our organization, everyone that's going to be touching that particular program, that they're educated on those particular compliances. And so we use a couple of different compliance education platforms. And so we align that with our clients. For instance, we use InfoSec Institute or nob4.com. Those all have a variety of compliance education tools that we can use to train individuals. Certainly doesn't cover everything, and so we do have a compliance officer that looks at all of our stuff as well and makes sure that we're following those guidelines. But I think the most important thing is, every single client is different, and they have their view of compliance. And so we try to make sure that we're also educating them on our processes to make sure that everyone's aligned. Because sometimes, we do get clients that demand kind of a higher compliance level, maybe that's necessary. And we don't want to overburden, our processes and cause that to be more costly for them. So I think just, understanding what clients are asking for, and then also educating them on the requirements that we already have in place.
You raised an interesting point there. And so the contracting process with customers, it's interesting because I obviously review a lot of contracts, and sellers have varying degrees of compliance requirements. And it becomes an issue the larger the organization becomes, who's contractually obligated to meet those compliance requirements. It could be a different level of audits, or higher level of insurance, or a certain amount of training for employees, a whole host of different things I've seen in contracts. And does anybody have any approaches they'd like to share for how they make sure that within their organization, they're meeting all of those various requirements?
That one, Michelle. So a part of our review process first starts with ensuring that we're reviewing the contracts and the requirements as we're onboarding any new program or implementing any program at IBEX. And so we have key stakeholders that are reviewing the contract. That includes legal, compliance, and ensuring that we also have the right level of IT security controls involved. So all the contracts actually reviewed by each one of the stakeholders, and we will then highlight the areas that need to be incorporated, and as well as what controls or what we need to incorporate into the business to make sure that we're meeting those contractual requirements. In addition to that, as we look at not only the onboarding piece or looking at the commitments that are needed to be in place to further secure the business, as well as the data and the areas that are most important, is we actually look at monitoring that those controls are still existing and ongoing, not just when we are signing that contract and saying, yes, this can be done and we'll add these pieces into that. So part of that really requires an internal risk assessment to really take a deeper dive into understanding if those controls are still in place, as well as ensuring that you can analyze where there may be risk and how do you remediate those risks. And sometimes those risks may come about where you've identified risk on the client platform. And so it's really about incorporating those discussions with those key stakeholders to help them become aware of where those risks may be, and as well as ensure that we put solid plans in place to mitigate those.
Yeah, well, that would definitely be a kind of diamond standard for that type of process, and highly recommend that. You know, as technology advances, I've been hearing about a lot of unique pieces of technology that's built into the process that helps make this compliance process easier, and something that is definitely selling, I think, for companies that are hiring us out there. Would any of you like to talk about some of the technology that you're using via AI or auditing processes that are built in through technology? I'd love to hear about those.
Hey, Michelle. So I'd love to share with you one of our key areas that we also focus on in compliance. So compliance is really, when we look at compliance, there are different areas that we're looking at. We're looking at call compliance, ensuring that the calls are being handled and meeting all the regulatory environments, as well as ensuring that there's no data that's been exposed. Additionally, we also monitor or look at ways of detecting any type of risk to the business. And so we can also do that with the internal risk assessments that I shared with you, that I shared with the team earlier. But one of the areas that we have also incorporated is our AI technology tool, which is IBEX Witness, that monitors call compliance. And it's trained to look for suspicious behavior. And that technology actually is built on the different scenarios, on customers' interactions and the screen interactions at the agent level. And then we are able to train it to detect when suspicious activity has occurred and then flag it. And so then we have a team of compliance consultants that will come in and take a look at and review the activity and flag if there's any risk.
Yeah. You know, I think that's becoming so important to have those types of processes built in. You know, it's the regulatory environment right now is escalating. It's escalating in ways that are not public yet. And so I can tell you that as regulators are looking at compliance, and as they're looking at issues, especially in the teleservices space, anything that involves telephone calls, they really are looking for this type of proactive approach. You know, everything from having audit type processes set up to to looking at the FTC's website for the complaints that are received in various areas about phone numbers that you may be using, or phone numbers associated to you. And, you know, those are the expectations in today's environment. I think a few years ago, those would have been the nice to-dos, but it certainly feels like compliance is escalating. And Matt, you know, as you're engaging your customers, are you getting that sense from them as well that this is no longer something that's a nice to have? If you can't check all the boxes and make them feel like they can sleep very easily at night, there's not going to be a sale.
Yeah, definitely. It's something over the last few years that's really become more evident. Again, more of a prereq than, hey, a nice to have. So we were, thankful that we've been ahead of the curve, and continue to look at different ways that we can add, compliance into what we do. But we very much look at it as an opportunity to educate our clients, our prospects, what we know about the industry, what's changing in the industry. And that's why it's important to have events like this or be a part of PACE or other organizations. We certainly have our in-house team, but we leverage external teams as well. We're not 100% expert on every law because the laws change relatively frequently. As we discussed the other day with the new administration, there's speculation on what could happen and what couldn't happen. And our team's meeting regularly to determine, well, if it goes this way, this is what we need to do. If it goes that way, this is what we need to do, and have a contingency plan kind of in place and see how that impacts our clients across the board. So yeah, it's definitely a more pressing issue now than it's been in the past.
Yeah, and especially in the privacy front, I would say, in the absence of a federal privacy statute, we're seeing states that are moving pretty quickly. We've seen a couple privacy bills that have passed both houses or both sections of their general assemblies over the last month or so. And I agree, staying on top of those things is so critically important. And, I think that's a nice chance maybe to put a little bit of a plug in for PACE and how they try to assist with these types of things. As far as the staying up on compliance and being able to document the policies and procedures you have in place. We have the PACE SRO, the self-regulatory organization, which I call compliance in a box. It is something that's got all those standards for you that you can go through, do a self-assessment, and then there's a third-party auditor that comes in and validates that. It is a very rigorous set of standards to meet, and so when you have that SRO accreditation, it's something that companies really look at as a gold seal or a gold seal standard. And then we've got the customer engagement compliance professional, the CECP, which is an individual certification for compliance officers that also goes through the requirements for setting up a good compliance program. So if you're at the beginning of these types of things, I highly recommend sending your compliance officer to get a CECP certification. PACE also has its government affairs committee, its compliance officers forum. We provide regular advocacy updates, regulatory updates, laws that have passed. We have legislative monitoring. And then we have these types of compliance webinars that we put on pretty routinely. And then lastly, I'd highly encourage anybody who hasn't registered yet to register for the Washington Summit, May 11th through the 12th. It's virtual this year. We always have a whole host of regulators that come and speak at that event. And I think this year, more so than ever, the messages that will be heard there will be critically important for our industry. So mark your calendars and hopefully we'll see you all there virtually. So we're at the end of our time, but if anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask this panel, it's an amazing group of people that have given up their time to volunteer to provide us with this information. So now would be a great time to be able to ask those type of questions. And I am checking chat now to see if there's any. And Casey, if you're out there, if there are questions that have come in, that would be helpful. As I have lost my chat.
I'm not questions yet, but yeah, if someone has anything over to the right-hand side, you can ask.
Yeah, I one that I got earlier was, we do have a different administration in charge now, regardless of what your political views are. This isn't a political question, but obviously the administration prior to the current one had a very different approach on regulatory agencies and tried to remove regulations, did not want to add regulations. And I think we've probably gone as far on the other side of that as we can with the current regulation. So is that affecting anybody's approach to compliance, or are they getting different questions now than they were before about compliance programs? And anybody can take that.
I'll answer that.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Great angle for answering that one for sure.
No, absolutely. We have not really seen yet, but we expected to see more regulatory investigations or in general inquiries. But what I would like to say here is that regardless of who's in office and who is enforcing the laws, if you have a good compliance program, and again, there's no perfect company out there, and that's very important for everybody to understand. Otherwise, you will get a little bit more lax, right? But regardless of who's in office or what the efforts are being done on the enforcement side, if you have a compliance program that it's working on its own almost with the assistance of certain professionals, you should not be concerned. You should not be concerned on who's in office.
That's a great answer.
Good point. I would just add to that. I think that I don't think that we've seen any significant changes yet, but I think what we're doing is looking at just the behavior and the trends of our industry on the BPO side. So I can't believe I'm the first person to say the word COVID on this call, but nonetheless, I'm going there. But from a standpoint of what COVID brought us was, a big shift to work at home. Right. So now you're putting employees in homes that weren't really set up initially to do that. And you're putting them in geographies where, heretofore they weren't working in their homes. So we've had to do some extra things. And Sandra's been, very involved in that. We've had to do some extra things on the compliance side to make sure that we are, protecting the information that sits in a work at home environment. Not that that's all new to our industry, because there have been work at home initiatives for many years. But what COVID did bring us was, social distancing, and then people needed to, people going to work at home that, weren't before. So we're having to take a lot of extra steps to make sure that we're protecting our customers' data. We're setting up our agents for success from a compliance standpoint. And so I think that's a trend that's going to stay with us for a while, because we still have limited capacity in BPOs around the world. Matt, I'm sure that you're experiencing that as well. So I think that's something that we're looking at, is just the behaviors and the trends, and what do we think that's we need to prepare ourselves to get ready for. So I think Viviana made a very very poignant point. If you have a good compliance organization, then you shouldn't worry. You need not worry about what are the outcomes of it. But I think more importantly, we have to look at what's happening to where we're going in the industry and some of the trends we need to be ready for.
Yeah, I would agree, Julie and Viviana, right? If you have a strong compliance program, you'll always stay on ahead of it. One of the areas that we all got hit with in 2020 is changing working environments, and how those working environments also shifted kind of the way that the data flowed. And so one of the areas that we took away from 2020 was looking at the controls that we put in place to ensure that we were protecting the data. But in addition to that, adding additional reviews and assess that process. And then gathering from those assessments what needed to be changed, and then adopting those changes. So it's really about, as you're coming into any type of environment where there's a shift, is really about making sure you have a strong program that can assess and reassess any changes, and then making sure that you can have a shift really quickly to adopt to those changes. And that really comes from, as well as having a strong sponsorship in compliance, right? So when you talk about a culture of compliance, everyone here on this call and everyone that's in this meeting today probably has a really strong culture of compliance, but where does it start, right? And you really need that sponsorship from your executive leaders to ensure that it's heavily incorporated throughout the entire process.
That's a great point. Matt, were you going to say something?
I was going to, but Sandra kind of just reiterated. And I guess I will just say, as Julie mentioned, the strong compliance aspect of our business, is vitally important. And, whatever circumstances come up, if as Vivian mentioned, with that strong infrastructure in place, we can handle it. And I think COVID was a perfect example where we had our clients coming to us and prospects coming to us saying, what are you guys doing? How are you handling this? Looking at us as the experts of being on a much larger scale than most of them, obviously, with their in-house teams or their small workforces. So, I think that's what 2020, if anything, has proven, the importance of having that strong compliance aspect put together and kind of forward thinking and being prepared rather than waiting for after the fact.
Yeah, yeah, great point. Great point. Yeah, I can't believe we didn't speak about COVID. I think that's my mindset now. I think I'm ready to move on. I'm kind of done with it. I don't think the rest of the world is. So I may be ignoring it a little bit. But, one of the things that was just raised, and I think it's a great point too, is working with customers that maybe don't have that same culture of compliance. Are there any of you on this call that have decided to walk away from a potential client because you didn't think that they shared your values on compliance, or maybe you've even worked to improve their compliance programs? Joe, what about you?
Yeah, no, I was going to mention just recently we brought on a client in the education, and they pretty much gave us this like really wide range of compliance guidelines that didn't really apply to us. But we still felt like it was important that we educated everyone that was, again, I mentioned this earlier, in the process was just aware of those guidelines, because they do work internationally. So, GDPR did affect a small portion of their customers, even though we felt like our compliance was pretty much in line with that. We still wanted to make sure that anybody that might work on that particular project understood the GDPR, which doesn't affect necessarily people in the U.S. But if you're dealing with someone, even if they live in the U.S. but they're a citizen of a country in Europe, that it's going to apply to them. So it's those little things where I think just educating everyone. I think all the compliance people would agree is like, yeah, educate everybody on everything to a point where it doesn't just get over burdening on your organization. But I think there's ways to do that where at least they have an understanding, and it's good to have those people in that process to be able to say, hey, I don't think that this is really in compliance. What can we do to maybe change a process and make sure that it is? But we do that generally here, and we make sure that everyone is educated on the different types of compliance programs or compliance guidelines that are out there.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, Michelle, what we've seen is it almost depends on type of client. Sometimes it goes to the maturity of a client, right? So if you've got a client that's been, in this case, outsourcing for a long time, then they've got some really mature, compliance and security requirements that have been developed over time. We see sometimes with some of the newer economy clients, they might not be as locked down. Their systems might not be as locked down. They may not have, as mature of a process. And so that's where I think, to Joe's point, educating, right? Making sure that we come to the table and educate them and say, hey, we got to lock these systems down, and this is why, right? So I think sometimes we kind of see it depending on the type of client we're dealing with, right? And it not necessarily a vertical specific, but more a level of just, how long maturity, right? How long have they been at it? And again, some of our new economy clients who are in hyper growth mode, they're focused on their products, right? They're focused on products and solutions and getting those out there. So that's where they rely on us to be the experts to say, hey, let's let's help lock these systems down so that, we don't have a compliance issue, moving forward.
I will add to this that, of course, we're concerned about our vendors and those people building those customer relationships on our behalf. But I've also been on the other side internally in our organizations where you have to prove to investors and the people supporting our businesses that our compliance programs are working. And as a compliance lawyer, I can tell you that there's nothing that provides more satisfaction and that checks your balances and checks and balances are in place than going through those due diligences and being able to answer them comfortably. And so I've used a lot of their questions to also leverage our compliance programs because I know what they care about, especially in industries where the customer relationships are long. In the solar industry, for example, customer relationships are between 15 and 25 years. So investors care about how you're treating those customers. And if you are not checking the boxes and providing and promoting that culture of compliance, they're going to pick up on that fairly easily and they will walk away from you.
Wow, such a great point. Something we hadn't even really brought into the discussions yet. You know, we were talking about compliance sells just in the really, direct marketing type of sense for us selling our services. But taking a company public, we've been involved with a number of different large public offerings where we have conducted the due diligence on the compliance side, and talking about compliance selling or not selling, as the case may be, or with corporate acquisitions, those types of things, sales of companies. So really, that's a very important point. And for that, it's not just that you have a current compliance program that is checking all the boxes. It's, have you had a compliance program in place that checks all those boxes for the statute of limitations for that law? So this is one of those things that you definitely don't want to wait until you absolutely need it. It's got to be built in. It's got to be, like they would say, privacy by design, compliance by design, and really a fabric of the company when you get to those levels. All right. Any other topics you guys want to cover that you think our folks would be interested in? Any other experience shares? I know there's so much experience on this panel. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Greatly appreciate it. Wonderful information, inspiring to those of us that get a little bit weary. I think with compliance, sometimes it is possible to do it. It is possible to turn it into a system. It is possible to package it in a way that it leads to sales and differentiates you from your competitors. So I applaud you all. And Viviana, thank you for coming and giving us the other kind of side of that, the purchaser of folks that are investing in compliance. We appreciate that. And Casey, do we have any housekeeping we need to do at this point?
That is all. Again, yeah, thanks to all the panelists. This was great information. And for everyone else, we're going to be continuing these conversations over the next couple months. We'll do, similar sessions in March and in April as we lead up to Summit in May. And then we'll kind of, hopefully we can get this band back together in May too, and kind of have a broader discussion during our actual Washington Summit. So appreciate that. Also with this particular platform, as you all noticed, you were kind of at tables when we came in. So when we're finished here, we'll go back to the conversation mode. So feel free to stick around if you have a few minutes and chat with the people at your table. You continue this conversation, or just, have some social time if you'd like to. But again, thanks to everyone, and we'll have this recording up in the next couple of days too. So
take care.
Thank you, everyone.